Good evening and thank you for joining us. Well, Canada is once again facing an uncertain week, locked in a heated dispute with the United States over a digital services tax.
President Donald Trump saying that he was ending all trade discussions with Canada after claiming the country moved to implement a digital services tax and threatened to impose a fresh tariff rate within the next week.
Canada has rescinded a digital services tax on tech companies.
And because of this tax and spend policy now against U.S. digital companies, you guys are screwed.
In 2025, the average American household lost an estimated $3,800 in annual purchasing power, not because of inflationary trends at home, nor from an economic downturn, but as a direct consequence of a tax policy enacted in another country, Canada. It began with a seemingly isolated decision in Ottawa to impose a digital services tax on global tech giants like Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft, a move widely interpreted as Canada's attempt to reclaim a portion of big tech's revenues for domestic innovation. But while the tax was aimed squarely at Silicon Valley, the real financial burden landed elsewhere quietly and brutally on the backs of American consumers. The logic was simple, even if the outcome was anything but fair. Rather than absorb the new tax, tech companies responded by passing costs downstream. Advertising fees rose, marketplace sellers were hit with new surcharges, and cross-border digital services, the ones used daily by millions of Americans, became just a bit more expensive. That bit added up fast. Prices ticked up, consumer confidence ticked down, and the invisible thread tying global tech platforms to everyday household budgets suddenly snapped, revealing a harsh truth in the digital age. Policy crosses borders faster than products do. And when big tech protects its profits, it's not shareholders who pay. It's your grocery bill, your rent, your gas tank, your life. But how exactly did this ripple through daily life from job security to the cost of a car? And why did one foreign tax unleash a wave of financial pressure on the American middle class? The numbers don't lie, and they hit where it hurts most: your everyday bills.
Imagine your property taxes jumping from $15,000 to $91,000 overnight.
The tariffs kick in. Consumers are going to bear the brunt of this, and it's going to be painful.
According to researchers at Yale's Budget Lab, the combined impact of new Canadian taxes and retaliatory tariffs on imports like cars, steel, aluminum, and furniture has caused U.S. consumer prices to jump by 2.3%. That might not sound like much at first glance until you realize it translates to a $3,800 loss in purchasing power per household. And for low-income families, the damage is even worse, with losses starting at $1,700 a year. The magazine Time adds that the cost of daily necessities is climbing across the board. Cars, fuel, groceries, and even home renovation materials like wood and drywall are now more expensive. In practical terms, a new car could cost anywhere from $800 to $200 more than last year. That means putting off home repairs, stretching grocery budgets thinner, and watching monthly expenses quietly swell, all because of a foreign tax that never appeared on any ballot. But higher prices are only the first sign of strain. As families cut back on spending, the broader economy begins to feel the slowdown. Reuters reports that personal consumption, the backbone of U.S. economic activity, dropped by 0.1% in May 2025. It's a small but telling decline, signaling growing anxiety among consumers. With prices up and wages stagnant, confidence has started to erode, and people are holding their wallets a little tighter. Market analysts urge caution, warning that emotional pullbacks could make the downturn worse. They still believe recovery is possible, but only if inflation eases and policies stabilize, two things that now seem increasingly out of reach. And then there's the job market. Budget Lab estimates that if the current trajectory continues, the U.S. economy could shed up to 79,000 jobs between 2025 and 2027, with GDP shrinking by 0.5 to 0.9 percentage points. States like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, home to major auto and metal industries, are already feeling the heat. With input costs rising by as much as 7%, some manufacturers have begun cutting hiring plans and slowing production. Factories are still open, but job boards are suddenly quiet. Unemployment, according to Reuters, could rise to 4.3% if the trade standoff continues, a level that may not trigger panic but could tighten the belt for thousands of working families. All of this puts the Federal Reserve in a bind. They had planned to cut interest rates in late 2025, a much-needed move to stimulate the economy. But now, with inflation climbing and growth slowing, the Fed is stuck between two bad choices: cut rates and risk pouring fuel on the inflation fire, hold steady, and watch consumer demand and business investment cool even further. Data from the University of Michigan shows that medium-term inflation expectations have already climbed to 3.3%, up from 3%. When in December 2024, a clear sign that Americans are bracing for more expensive months ahead. One foreign tax triggered all of this, but what exactly did Canada do? To understand how a single policy in Ottawa ended up squeezing wallets across America, we need to look closely at the law that quietly started it all. At the heart of this economic chain reaction lies a single piece of legislation from Ottawa Bill C-96, also known as Canada's Digital Services Tax. On paper, it seemed small, even technical, but in practice, it struck a direct blow at the core of America's most powerful companies and set off a ripple that would cross borders, hit prices, and reshape household budgets thousands of miles away. The law imposes a 3% tax on global revenues earned by digital companies that meet two thresholds: more than $750 million in worldwide revenue and at least $20 million generated within Canada. In effect, it targets a narrow group of multinational tech giants firms like Amazon, Google, Meta, and Microsoft that dominate online advertising, cloud computing, app marketplaces, and digital commerce in Canada and beyond. The official goal: to reclaim a fair share of value generated within Canada's digital economy and funnel it back into public investment, specifically into Canada's AI Innovation Fund, centered around the fast-growing tech corridor from Montreal to Waterloo. The government framed it as a simple matter of digital justice. If big tech profits from Canadian users, it should help fund Canada's future. The numbers were big, but not earth-shattering, at least not at first glance. The Canadian government expected to collect about $4.1 billion in the first year, with an average of $5.3 billion annually over the next 4 years. That revenue, officials said, would help fuel domestic innovation and reduce reliance on foreign capital for AI development. But what Canadian lawmakers saw as a measured tax reform, global markets saw as a provocation. For big tech, it was a direct attack on margins, and for the U.S., it was a challenge that couldn't go unanswered. What began as a niche policy in Ottawa would soon unleash a shockwave that landed hardest on American wallets, not Canadian ones, driving up costs, disrupting jobs, and igniting a silent economic backlash across the U.S. middle class. For tech giants like Amazon, Google, Meta, and Apple, Canada's digital services tax wasn't just a policy annoyance, it was a price tag. And instead of absorbing that cost, they did what global corporations do best: they passed it along. Estimates from multiple sources, including CBT News, Politico, and The Verge, suggest the DST could cost big tech as much as $2 billion per year in new taxes. The Canadian government, for its part, projected that it would collect around $7.2 billion over 5 years, or roughly $1.4 billion annually from the sector. But those losses weren't going to come out of corporate profits. Shortly after the tax was announced, Google quietly added a 2.5% surcharge on all advertising services purchased in Canada. Amazon followed suit, applying a 3% fee on third-party sellers, many of whom rely on Amazon's global platform to reach customers in both Canada and the United States. And since these platforms operate across borders, it didn't take long before some of those extra charges spilled over into the U.S. market. In other words, American users weren't just bystanders, they became the tax buffer. Whether you were a small business running digital ads or a consumer buying goods online, your costs went up, and there was no transparent line item explaining why. It wasn't labeled a Canada fee, but it was baked into the prices just the same. And that's what makes this so slippery: you feel the pain without ever seeing the punch. Meanwhile, Wall Street was watching. In the days leading up to the tax's implementation on June 30th, shares of the major tech firms began to slip, reflecting investor fears that higher international costs could cut into earnings. And yet, the most telling reaction didn't come from investors or executives. It came from consumers, many of whom never realized a political decision in Canada was quietly draining their wallets. In a digital economy where platforms stretch across continents, it's no longer the nation that pays, it's the user. And in this case, that user was the American public. The moment those extra fees started hitting American users, Washington responded, and it wasn't subtle. U.S. officials swiftly condemned Canada's digital services tax as a discriminatory and unilateral measure, claiming it violated the USMCA trade agreement, the very pact designed to prevent such one-sided moves between North American partners. Behind closed doors, officials weren't just upset that Canada was targeting big tech. They were alarmed by how easily American consumers ended up footing the bill. And that retaliation came with numbers. Washington threatened to impose 25% tariffs on a broad range of Canadian exports from aluminum and nickel to AI chips, 5G equipment, and even finished wood products. Economic forecasts suggest the retaliation may end up hurting the U.S. just as much, if not more, than Canada. Analysts at Budget Lab warned that a prolonged trade clash could shave 0.5 to 0.9 percentage points off U.S. GDP, raising fears of a mild recession if businesses pull back on investment or hiring. What started as a tax on digital ads became a drag on the entire U.S. economy, and for Washington, every move to retaliate only made the domestic damage harder to ignore. And just like that, millions of U.S. consumers found themselves footing the bill for a foreign policy they had no say in. Prices rose, confidence dropped, jobs wobbled, all because a handful of powerful companies chose to protect profits and no one stopped them. So, the real question isn't whether Canada went too far. It's this: why do everyday Americans keep paying the price for corporate power plays? What's your take? Should big tech be allowed to shift global taxes onto your wallet? Drop your thoughts below, because this tax war is far from over.